As you can see, there are quite a few prints in front of me right now. Reason being is because you're going to see a photograph on screen. I took this quite recently. I think it must have been about 3-4 weeks ago. And to date, it's one of my favorite photographs that I have taken, landscape pictures that I have taken. In this video that you're watching is a 3-part series in which I will be discussing how I came to photograph that particular shot and eventually print it, which is going to be quite interesting. It's what I'm going to be discussing in this video. So if you're interested in the printing side and in wanting to know a little bit more about how to print, then stay tuned. Before I even begin with discussing the photograph itself, I just want to reiterate how important the whole process of printing was. It's something that I did in the past, and I printed images in the past, but I never really printed it to the professional level that I'd say I've printed it off now. The end result is, in my opinion, incredible. And I'm so happy that I have gone down the whole printing route, because it's taught me so much about landscape photography that I never actually thought would even apply when it comes to printing. If there's any advice I can already give straight off the bat to those interested in elevating their photography to the next level and looking at investing in print, is that printing an image off, if it's done the right way, and even in the wrong way, you'll always learn something. But printing an image off is an incredible process, because the day that it comes out the way that you envision it in your head, the day that an image comes out physically looking exactly as you wanted, it's an incredible feeling. Because printing an image off is basically completing the whole photographic process. Usually what happens is that we go through the process, we go to the location, we shoot, and then a landscape photographer would go back home and spend X amount of hours on Lightroom editing, and then when that process is done and dusted with, that's it, it's finished. It usually ends there, and then finally uploaded to Instagram, Facebook, wherever it is again that you upload to. But printing takes that even further, and I've learned with printing is that it's not just fun, and of course it is costly or can be costly. If it's done right, it's incredible, because you have something physical in your hand, something that you took and that others can really appreciate. Now, moving on to the printing side itself, and before I even say what I'm going to say, let me just quickly show you the photograph, the end result. And it's quite big, but I'm very happy with it. This is the final image. I'll leave another recording so you guys can have a look. But in essence, printing is difficult. And printing is difficult because there are so many factors that you have to consider. You have to consider the cost. You have to consider what size you want. You have to consider the thickness of the paper. You have to consider if you're printing in satin, gloss, or matte. You have to consider so many different factors come into play when looking to print. After a certain size, so many factors come into play when looking to print that you really need to spend your money wisely. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that I've learned so far about printing. It's knowing where to spend your money. Number one, the very first thing that I would recommend you to do before even printing off is understanding what the print is for, or who the print is for. Is this print a gift for someone? Is this print for a client? In which case you're probably going to want to invest a little bit more money to have a much more professional print. Is this print for yourself to hang around in the house? Whatever the case, you have to understand prior to printing what the purpose of the print is for. If this print is going to be something that's going to be hanged in a shop for others to see, then in my opinion, you're going to want the best quality possible, and you're going to want the best materials used for the print possible. You're probably going to want to print on photographic paper as opposed to printing on canvas. There's nothing wrong with printing on canvas, but in my personal view, sometimes printing on canvas doesn't look as necessarily as professional as printing on photographic paper. So there are certain aspects to printing that you have to consider, like who is this going to be for, before you even touch a computer, before you even consider, okay, this is the photograph that I want printed, okay, this is the size that I want printing, because your client might have certain requirements. Your house also has certain requirements. You can't necessarily print a very, very big piece. You can't have a very, very big piece in your bedroom if you only have a certain amount of wall space. In a nutshell, if you're considering printing off a high quality print, something like this that you've just seen, for example, then you're most probably willing to already spend a considerable amount of money to do so. It's kind of inevitable. I mean, obviously, spending the most money isn't always going to give you the best product. As previously stated, you have to kind of pick and choose where your money goes. But ultimately, you're going to want the majority of your money, or at least a portion of your money, a big portion of your money, invested in a high quality print, in the print itself, in the photographic paper. As an example, let's take this image that I took. Now, this image that I took here was done on a 55 by 40 centimeter photographic paper, high gloss. And the image itself cost me around £25 to actually produce. This is without shipping because I got this image printed off locally. So obviously the shipping cost doesn't really apply. But the good thing about this image is that it actually took me about 2 or 3 tries before I started to realize the things that were going wrong in terms of the image itself. So the image was £25 and the frame was roughly around the same price. Not only that, I had to get the borders of the image, what's inside the image, fitted in order to fit the size of the image itself, because the borders didn't really coincide with the size that I'd printed the image off for. But in a nutshell, the point that I'm trying to make is that there were 3 factors that influenced the price of this image, or the cost of this image. I think it ended up totaling me around £60 to £65 in order to produce. This is of course minus the editing hours that I put behind the photograph and the time it took to take the image itself. So print is already expensive if you're planning on going down the more expensive route. And the reason why I would recommend to at least once print a much higher quality version of your image is because A, if you have a client and it needs to be handed in, or B, so you can really understand what your photograph physically looks like. It will look completely different than how it is on screen. So point number 2, the second piece of advice that I would give, is even before considering purchasing a frame and a print, is to check the size of the photograph that you've exported. So let's just say you've gone on Lightroom or Photoshop or wherever it is that you do your edits, and you've completely finished the editing side of your photograph, and let's just say that you've cropped a portion of your photograph off. That image that you've cropped to a new size has now become a new size. So if you were to blow it up, you'd need to stick with the proportions in order for it to fit a frame size, if you know what I'm trying to say. When you go to a printing house, or when you go to a publishing house, or wherever it is that you go to print, or maybe even online, they will either A, adjust the size for you, in other words, they will resize the image, or they will B, ask you to resize the image yourself in order to not lose aspects of a photograph that you might not want to be lost, basically. So let me give you an example. This photograph was, as I said, 55 by 40 centimeters. The photograph was 55 by 40 centimeters, not the frame size. Not even the inside of the frame, not even the inside of the border. So already here you have a white line, which means that the photograph itself is smaller than what was stated would fit inside this frame. I then had to adjust, I think I had to pay an extra amount of money for the border here to be extended upwards in order to cover the bottom parts of the picture for it to make sense. I mean, if not, it would just look ugly if I left it like this. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you really need to check your sizes before you even invest money in frames, because not all frames will fit all pictures. And it's always good to first buy a frame, 100%. In my opinion, I think you should buy a frame unless the picture is 100% bespoke. But I think it is important to purchase a frame first, because you want to buy the picture to coincide with the frame that you've bought, not the other way around. So the reason why I say check the frame size is because you need to consider the possibility of losing and cropping aspects of your photograph to fit the frame itself. Now, there are, of course, many standard photo sizes that you can just go to a photo lab, get printed on A4, get printed on normal standard photographic paper, and it would be absolutely fine, because the images would be either A, already adjusted to that size, or B, the photo lab would do the adjustments for you. But anything bigger than A4, in my opinion, is where you run into problems when it comes to determining the size of the image and how it will fit a canvas and how it will fit a frame and how it will fit whatever it is that you're putting the image into. So anything bigger than A4, I've noticed, for example, this one here is a 30 by 40. Anything bigger than either this or anything bigger than that is already where I start to encounter certain problems in terms of the frame, in terms of the fitting into the frames and everything. So thank you so much, everyone, to those of you who have stuck around until the end of this part 1. Do stay tuned for part 2 and 3. They're on their way. I will be discussing a hell of a lot more about the printing, giving you guys a lot more advice about printing itself. So do stay tuned for part 2 and 3. And I'll also leave a link in the description to a video from another YouTuber by the name of Lawrence Baker, I believe his name is. I'll leave the link in the description of this video. And his video is all about His video is all about aspect ratio, and I think it's super important. It is a little bit of a long video, but I do suggest you watch it because it is important if you guys are interested in understanding aspect ratio and how that specifically applies to Lightroom settings. So do check his video out. He's very informative. He knows what he's talking about. The guy's good. But aside from that, thank you so much. Do remember to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. I do very much appreciate it. And thanks, guys. Laters.